Hello and welcome to our demo. Today, I'll demo our system user initialization, our authentication service, and our permission-based access to our core API. I'll also walk through our graphical IDE that we continue to develop and our admin console, which facilitates user and permission management. Now we'll start the live demo. In order to illustrate our initialization functionality, I'm going to log in to our admin console. As you can see here, the system detects that there are no users in our network. When we add a user, the system will generate a passkey that will allow us to communicate with the server to configure users, add permissions, and so on. After the user is created, the system will force a logout and require us to log in again as the newly created user. Now we're logged in as the admin user. Now for the next part of our demo, I'll create 2 non-admin test users and explore their permissions. Now we'll create a new non-admin user and commit the account details to the blockchain. Now let's create the second user. Now we have our 2 test users. Next, let's go to the permissions management tool and modify our data access permissions. In the system, we have predefined entities that are assigned a default set of access permissions. For example, when test user 1 creates a record, test user 2 will not be able to see what they have written. Each user by default is only able to write, load, and read their own data. In contrast, admin users are able to view all records from the system. In order to demonstrate this permission system, I'll log in to the same console, but this time as test user 1. Now, when I look at the list of users, I can only see test user 1. Also, when I go into the permissions management tool, I can only see my own permissions. Now I'll log in as test user 2. As we can see, the same scenario exists for test user 2. Now I'll log into Graphical, which is a development tool for querying and manipulating the GraphQL API. Here I'm logged in as test user 1. I will also log into the admin account in a separate window. Let's say, for example, we want to query all of the users in the system as an admin. I will query by first name, and the system will display the 3 accounts that we registered previously. On the other hand, if I try to run the same query as test user 1, I'm only able to see myself, test user 1. Similarly, if I run the same query as test user 2, I am again only able to see myself, test user 2. Now let's create a record in the system called RXB patient. We will use the RXB insert mutation function. Let's name it add test record and call the RXB patient insert function and give it some parameters. Here, we'll create several parameter types: a Boolean, a string, and an integer. We also want to return some metadata. Let's return the record ID, the version number, and the record status. This will be the data saved in the blockchain. Next, let's add the metadata parameters we just defined and submit it. Now we can see that this record status is pending. Next, let's query the record we just created. As test user 1, we can see all of the information. However, if we try to run the same query as test user 2, we will not see anything because we created the first record as test user 1. However, if we run this as our admin user, we will be able to see it because the admin user has permissions to read records created by any other user. Now we'll create a record for test user 2. If we run a query as test user 1 again, we will only see one record. However, if we run the query as an admin, we'll be able to see the records created by both test user 1 and test user 2. Now, how can I make it so that test user 1 can see the record of test user 2 and vice versa? Well, that's simple. The admin user can use the permissions management tool to give test user 2 permissions to read the records of test user 1. This means that test user 2 now has access to read the records owned by test user 1. To illustrate this, we can go back and run a query as test user 2 and view the records of test user 1. We can also request to see the permissions during our query. With that, we can close our live demo session and move forward. Now we will look at what other functionalities we need to develop for the alpha release. First, we need to develop permissions requests for non-admin users. What we presented today represents how admin users can give permission to other users to have access to records they do not own. For example, this is like a patient giving permission to a doctor to read or write their records. Next, we need to create the data encryption mechanism at the data field level. Add node licensing, continue developing the admin console, add meaningful data to the dashboard, finalize permissions, and start the node management functionality. Finally, we need to create a development environment to test alpha release. We're excited for the future of this project and facilitating the transformation of healthcare. Thank you so much for your time.